This conversation is part of an interview project for the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. We're speaking with Yale alumni in order to more deeply understand the hearts and minds of those who work at the intersection of spiritual leadership and environmental action. Today, we are grateful to be joined by Stephen Blackmer. Steve is founder and former priest at Church of the Woods in Canterbury, New Hampshire. Before being ordained in the Episcopal Church, Steve worked for 25 years in forest conservation in the northern forest region of New England and New York. Steve lives in an off-grid chapel in the woods where Church of the Woods meets, where he is a writer, forest guardian, and spiritual companion.
I'd love to kind of start by hearing you've just returned from a 124-day journey, right? Road trip, and are at a moment of transition in your own life. So I'd love to hear a little bit about this journey that you've been on, and this period in your professional and personal world.
Yeah, sure. So I've just come back from this long journey that began the beginning of October and ended 2 weeks ago. A journey first to Peru and for 6 weeks, and then a road trip driving around the U.S. As a time in between, an interstitial space, liminal space between the professional world that I'd inhabited for many years in with different garb, different clothing at different times, quite literally, and a next stage of life and work. So settling back into the woods in New Hampshire, into my little hermitage, or pustynia, using the Russian Orthodox word for somebody who dwells in the forest in devotion to God. And starting to work intensively on writing some of what we're going to talk about. And in September, I wrapped up my 10 years of service as priest and creator of Church of the Woods in New Hampshire, and turned the leadership of the community over to others. And over the course of the fall, I also asked to be released from my vows as a priest in the Episcopal Church, and was released in November from that. So whereas my identity in this work in a lot of ways has been as a priest and leader of Church of the Woods, I am now neither one of those. So it's a pretty interesting time.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure, I know this is a huge question, but I'm kind of just curious if you for whatever arises around the kind of just what brought you to that decision, kind of to leave the priesthood, and what in this moment, sort of as you're thinking about the next period of your work in life, kind of what are you seeing?
Yeah. This is the whole backstory that we probably won't have time to go into today, but the whole idea of becoming a priest wasn't mine to begin with. I was summoned into it by, I sometimes say visions, voices, and dreams, calling me into this life. But it was very clear from the very, very beginning, including all my time at YDS, that that my priestly ministry was about connection with the earth, and that I was not being called into the church in order to serve in kind of the usual indoor kinds of ways. Mm-hmm. And so creating Church of the Woods was something that, when that came to me, with that sort of task was given to me, it made perfect sense to me. It absolutely fit who I am and why I would have been called to be a priest. But it did not fit easily into the structures and norms and customs of the Episcopal Church, nor pretty much any church. So from the very beginning, there was a tension between what I feel, I'm quite certain, what it was I was being called to do. That is what God was charging me with or inviting me into, and what the institutional church is accustomed to. So there was a tension from the very beginning, which oftentimes was very creative, but sometimes was also very challenging. The language that I would use, the practice, the most kind of the most visible, concrete expression of that was when consecrating and offering consecrated bread and wine, the body and blood of Christ, at the culmination of the service in the Eucharist. From the very beginning of Church of the Woods, it was clear to me that required offering bread and wine to the earth, mm-hmm. and to other creatures in addition to technically baptized Christians. And to his great credit, my bishop went along with a lot of this. Probably at some cost to himself. Mm-hmm. I don't actually know. But he allowed it. But it was that, and there were other things where what I felt I was being asked to do to serve the church was in conflict with the kind of the usual practices. Excuse me. In the last couple of years, that got more intense. I think I had a feeling that I needed to stretch the boundaries farther rather than less far. And in particular, at the very end, in the last year or two, when I knew it was time for me to retire and turn over leadership, we ran into a real dilemma where, in a typical way, for good reasons, when a priest leaves a congregation, she or he is expected to be away from that, completely out of touch with that community for at least a year, often two, to allow space for the congregation to grow into a new pattern of with a new leader. That practice of leaving is very difficult here because I live on the land where the church meets. I actually own the land where the church meets. So I am not either willing or able to completely leave. Mm-hmm. So in a very practical sense, wrestled with this. One thing I could do is no longer be the priest. And so while I am not currently and have not been in touch with the community, so I'm also leaving it that way. But so that was kind of one, in a very practical sense, just that tension. But as the bishop and I used to talk about, there's a tension in both the Hebrew tradition continuing in the Christian tradition, between the priestly roles and the prophetic roles. The priest whose job is to carry out the appropriate rituals in the temple, in keeping with the tradition. And the prophetic role is, and Jesus is the great exemplar of this, is to say, no, you guys have completely missed the point. There's this whole other way of returning to faithful life in God. And I think that was the essence of the tension that I felt in, as I said to the bishop, I have a prophetic priesthood. There's an inherent, again, at best, creative, an inherent tension in that. And in the end, as I got farther along, I could no longer hold that tension, or we could no longer hold that tension, and it risked becoming destructive. So it took several years of wrestling with this and needing to kind of complete my time as leader of Church of the Woods in a good way, and then say, okay, I did, in that priestly role, I did what I could do. I did what I was charged with. Now it's time for me to take on a different role, where I can more fully inhabit that prophetic voice, less constrained.
Wow.
Yeah. So big change.
Yeah, big change. Yeah. It's amazing to get to be speaking to you in this moment. Like I feel the kind of the transition of the moment.
Literally, I got back from this trip 2 weeks ago, and it was okay. Here I am, different role, different life. Right.
Wow. Yeah. So I'm kind of curious to go kind of to before you entered this role, right? Kind of the other end of this, and kind of ask a little bit. I know that you spent many years before becoming sort of a religious practitioner, many years in the sort of secular environmental conservation kind of world. So I'm just really curious to hear kind of a little bit, being on this side of both of those experiences, sort of a little bit of kind of compare and contrast between what it was like kind of working in both of those spaces.
Yeah, boy, really fascinating. Yeah, my first action, as I would call it, as a sort of activist, was as a 12-year-old. So this was in the late 1960s, 1966 or 7, 8, somewhere around in there. A wetland nearby where I lived was slated to be filled to expand a road. And we used to ice skate on this wetland, and I loved it and got absolutely irate when I heard this was going to happen. Enlisted neighbor kids and my brother and sister, and we wrote a letter to the editor complaining mightily. Which I'm sure had no effect whatsoever. But the wetland is still there. And I think that's because there were other people who were working on wetlands, at that point, wetlands laws, that made a big difference. So there was somehow there was a piece of me that was both, had that kind of deep connection with the land, but also wanted to organize people to do something about it. Never occurred to me that there was a career in that until after college. I kind of stumbled into working on forest policy issues, and just instantly said, "Oh, I'm at home in this world." I was just the skills I have of organizing and advocacy and communication strategy. I was just good at it, and loved it, and started. So I had the first job in the state of Maine for a couple of years. Then I came to New Haven and got a master's in forestry at Yale, came back, moved back to New Hampshire, and have been here ever since, building and running nonprofit conservation organizations, first as a staff person, and then as a policy program staff, and then as executive director. And I mean, it was really great work. I was fortunate to be doing good work at a time when we could really make a difference, and there did a lot of stuff that will endure in terms of conserving land. And then I got summoned out of that. In a sense, both work drew on similar organizational skills, the ability to organize and work with people, but their ways of seeking change are really different. Where the advocacy work is focused on the change that one seeks is always out there with somebody else, trying to change somebody else, whether individuals or systems, change policy. In a sense, it's always that there's somewhere, the problem lies somewhere else. When you get into the spiritual work, it's much more, it's not to say that goes away, but that for me at least, the bigger part is the change lies within. And I think part of there was a little phrase that kept showing up. This was kind of in my later 40s, so early 2000s. That kept showing up in my consciousness, that we're winning the battles, because all of the stuff I worked on was very successful in terms of the specific, concrete, the tangible objectives we set out were very, kind of stunningly successful. We're winning the battles, but we're losing the war. That is, no matter how many of these little battles we win, and some of them were quite large, still kind of our relationship with the earth is getting worse and worse and worse. So winning the battles but losing the war. There must be another way was the mantra that kept showing up in me. There must be another way. There must be another way. And what that led me to is this work, which really is the other way, is the deep, slow, largely invisible work of transforming human consciousness, human presence, which happens one person at a time rather than getting Congress to pass a law. Really, really, really different. I think both are necessary. Paradoxically, at this moment in time, when it seems like so much of the structures and systems of government are being torn apart, I think that inward change becomes more and more and more important. It's the only ground we've got that can really hold. Which is not to say the activism isn't critical, because it is critical, but by itself it will not be enough. So this wasn't kind of my plan when I said, so I'm going to go to Divinity school and become a priest. There was no such plan, not in any human consciousness that I'm aware of. But as I look back and make sense of it, say, that's what was going on. There's this sense of there's a deeper realm of work that has to happen, which is actually transforming human beings. And the spiritual religious world at its best actually does that. Other related realms do too, but it's an immensely powerful one. And it's the one that, for whatever mysterious purposes, that I was called into.
Yeah. Can you, I'd love, could you take us inside of that, the places within your spiritual tradition that you did find were were transformative for you, for your community, like the kind of deeper, slower work of changing our own relationships with the living world. What did you draw on?
In many ways, I drew on things that I already knew. When I was at the TIV school and sort of taking classes, basic New and Old Testament stuff, I remember vividly getting to the Gospel of Matthew and reading in there, it just tucked away, one sentence hidden in between two miracles, was this one sentence, and then Jesus went alone up the mountain to pray. And I read that and I said, well, of course. Why don't they teach us this? Why don't they teach us that? So one of the things I did at the very beginning of Church of the Woods was building in a time of solitary, quiet, contemplative walking in the forest. So the way the service works is there are readings and then a short homily, and then everybody goes off alone into the woods. I mean, we're already in the woods, but sort of goes off in kind of a short period of just communion, literally communion with the land. Hardly a revolutionary idea, but building it into the structure of the liturgy changes the entire service. Likewise, at the end, offering communion to the earth changes the entire structure. So these are hardly new or revolutionary ideas, but they transform people's experience of that, of the sacrament and the liturgy as intermediaries between not only humans and the divine world, but humans and the natural world. So there are a lot of just really simple, really simple practices. The idea that the land itself, this is kind of the foundational idea of Church of the Woods, the land itself is the sacred space. We're not walled off from the rest of life, but this is the original, still, and deepest and truest sacred space simply because it's here and filled with love and life. So there's kind of all of those, you could call it liturgical reasons. But the other thing is that direct encounters with the divine, with God, however one wants to label that. And increasingly, I find myself returning to saying there's a fundamental transformation of human beings that happens when we come into contact with the mystery of the divine. And it changes us. And that is certainly how this whole thing began for me. It was nothing rational about it. I was claimed, and the form it took for me, I was claimed by a God who shows up in Christian garb, and it utterly transformed my life. So just that mystery, I've started thinking about Christianity as an energy more than a religion. And it's not the only one, of course, but there's an energetic presence, an energetic signature of Jesus or Mary or St. Francis that touches people and changes them invisibly from the inside out. And increasingly, I think that's probably the source of our greatest hope. It's quite sort of this eternal mystery. How does that happen? Where does it come from? But it changes. It changes lives, and it is big enough still to change everything. It just happens one person at a time.
Right. Yeah. I know you've mentioned kind of specifically the role of like trees and forest in Christian tradition and obviously in Church of the Woods. So I'd kind of, can you say a little bit more about that connection to the role of forest in particular in your community and as you see it in Christian tradition?
Yeah, let's just look, just a really simple way, look biblically at the story of Adam and Eve in the garden where there's the tree of life. So that's kind of symbolic presence of tree as, ancient understanding as tree as one of the creatures that links heavenly realms and earthly realms, with its branches reaching toward the sky and its roots reaching down deep into the earth. At the very, very end of the Bible, we return to the tree of life, the last chapters of the book of Revelation. When God descends to earth, people don't go to heaven. God descends to earth, and there is, in the city, is the river and the trees with the leaves of the nations. So the tree of life returns. In between, there's the cross, which is a tree stripped of roots and branches. It's the tree of life become a place of death, but also of transformation, or the beginning of transformation. So those are the most vibrant, indicate kind of sort of powerful connections of tree, not so much forest, in part because the tradition, the land of Palestine, Israel, is pretty dry.
Yeah.
There are not a lot of forests.
Yeah.
So it's not a forest-based tradition in that way, but trees are really important. Here, where I live in New Hampshire, is the landscape is, unless one actively keeps it not forest, it is forest. The land, everything about it wants to grow trees. And unless it's too wet, everything here will grow trees. So here, it's simply it's what we have, and there's forests being places in a European mythological sense where that are beyond they're the outskirts of civilization, where one leaves the village, one walks out of the cultivated areas, one goes beyond the fence and into the wild places where human ways no longer hold sway. And so the forest still represents that, where there are forces of life that are greater than merely human. Some people teach things like asking permission to walk into the forest, asking permission of the trees. I don't go along with that at all. I think we belong here. But we have to live into what does it mean to walk in and know that one is at home. That's another thing, I guess, that we do on Sundays, is people walk in, they know they're in a sacred space. And we are part of the forest and become part of the forest.
Yeah.
And simply my living here kind of really increases that.
Right.
I've been here for 5 years now, living in an intimate, close relationship with the woods.
Yeah, it just strikes me like so much of what you're speaking about has this, like, kind of goes to this sort of slow, deep, over time work, as you were speaking to, like that sense of building, a sense of belonging and home.
Yeah.
That takes time, and that is like
it
really
takes time. Yeah.
So
It takes time, and almost everything in our world currently pushes us in the other direction.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I am kind of curious to just think about, as we're coming towards the end of our conversation, sort of as you think about like our world, our society, and sort of what are the kind of challenges and places of opportunity in getting all of this that you're speaking of, this kind of relationship that you're speaking of, to grow, and for people to be able to connect in this way. What are kind of some of the main, like the big challenges and opportunities as you're just that are for you right now feel like a lot?
Yeah. The opportunities are that more and more people are aware of this. I think there's a lot. There's a lot of that in a lot of different practices and traditions. People leaving the church to go into the woods, or kind of creating their own creative mixes of things. And basically, I think that's a very good thing. The challenges are immense. I mean, like, wow. Right now, the whole move towards increasingly digital life, which is utterly disconnected from grounded ecological life, scares me. It scares me more right now than climate change. But that may just be because I've been sitting with climate change versus sort of awareness of that for so long. Climate change wise, the Earth's going to be fine. The real hardship is that the things we are accustomed to make our daily lives comfortable and possible are going to change radically. We will be vastly, what's the word I want to look like? I want to say inconvenienced, to put it politely. We will be tremendously inconvenienced if cities flood and so on, and there will be great hurt and suffering. But once we let go of our inconvenience and change, we can adapt to. Human beings are actually extraordinarily good at that. It will be very hard. This is hard. This is one of the parts of the Christian tradition that is painful truth, is that resurrection comes only after death. I don't think there's a way through all of this without death, destruction, catastrophe. I just don't think there is. And, the hopeful thing is that's not the end. And, there is more. It's not the end of the story. There is more after that. But I think we have messed so much and continue with forces that we don't understand, don't respect, cannot control. And we will try mightily, mightily, mightily to control them, to pin them down, to put them back in their boxes. I don't believe we can do that. And I grieve in advance for the suffering that will come from that. And if this is back to the practical role of activism, anything we can do to make that less severe, great. But it's not going to stop it. We've unleashed things. That's something I've believed for a long, long time. Our power is vastly greater than our wisdom. That's a way to sum up all of this. Our power is vastly greater than our wisdom. We do have back to the biblical dominion. Look at all the things we have the power to change, but it's still bigger than we are, and our wisdom has not kept up, not remotely. If anything, right now it feels like the gap is growing bigger between our power and our wisdom. So it goes back to the internal, and there has to be another way of that, developing the inner wisdom of each of us individually and all of us collectively. And our spiritual traditions, I'll go out on a limb and say, are the only really good way we have to do that. We have nothing else that is big enough.
Thank you so much for this. I mean, I feel really, there's so much else I want to ask you, but I'm just, so moved and inspired and sobered by your, just your prophetic voice, your priestly voice, and just the work in the world that you've done. And there's so much that I'm going to be holding with this from this conversation. So, thank you.
Yeah, to hold hope in the midst.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah.
But somebody has to do that. Somebody has to do that. And I'll speak beyond me. That's our job.
Yeah.
That's your job in doing this. It's my job. It's the job of all of us who are a part of this.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so I will pause our recording and we'll process a little bit, but thank you again so much for sharing with us.
Thank you for the opportunity.